Right. So as I was saying, to install Node.js on your machine, right? You click on install, and it will and then run the installer, and it will copy. It will install it on your either applications folder in Mac, or it will install it as a directory on the program files. Okay. Node.exe is the equivalent to the Java exe, right? If you're running Java, right? It's the interpreter, right? Whereas Java will interpret compiled code, right? Interprets .class. Node.exe interprets just plain old JavaScript files, right? So Node, what really is just an interpreter of JavaScript that it can run JavaScript on a machine, right? As opposed on a desktop, right? As opposed to running it on the browser, right? Now we've been executing JavaScript on a browser for quite some time through the semester. Being able to run it on a desktop, right, opens up all new possibilities, right? Running it on a machine. You don't have the restrictions that you might have running this on a browser, right? In a browser, there's all sorts of security constraints, whereas running on a machine, you have full access to the network, you can access to the file system, access to the database, right? And so all Node is just an interpreter, right? Interprets JavaScript. You can run just plain old JavaScript locally. Obviously, you don't have certain objects you normally have in the browser. Like, for instance, you can't do alerts, right? Because alerts, that's meant to be done in a window inside of a browser, right? But you can still do console, right? You can print out to the console to standard output. In a browser, obviously, it prints out to the browser's console. Over here, it prints out to standard output, right? So let's start off with a very simple example. I'll create a directory here. New folder, call it Node 5610 for this course. And in there, we're going to create a couple things, right? Let's create a hello world. Oh, actually, let me open it up with Visual Studio, right? Let me say open website, and I'll open 5610. There it is. I'll say open. And in there, I'm going to create a hello world. I'll say add JavaScript. And this will be, let's see, just hello. Yes. And in here, you can do things that you would normally be able to do in JavaScript, in the browser, right? You can say console log hello world, right? Now, again, if you're running this on a browser, this will print out to the browser's console. But now, this is running locally on our machine. So we can go back up and Node 5610, CD Node 5610. And we can run Node. Oh, one thing, the Node exe needs to be on your path, right? So you can execute the Node exe from anywhere in your console. Yes, that makes sense, right? So this node here, this node is that node we saw in program files, Node.js, yes? So if I give it hello.js, right, it executes it, and there it is, so hello world, right? And everything you would expect that you can do on the browser, well, most everything, you can also do here, right? So you have for loops, functions, objects, JSON, everything you would expect, right, is still available here, right? So that's all really Node is, right? An interpreter for JavaScript, but it executes on the desktop. That's all it is, right? And if that were it, it would be very exciting. But like every framework, the framework, really what makes a framework interesting is all the libraries that are available in that framework, right? Certainly, .NET has tons of libraries, right, that make it a very exciting framework to work in. Java does as well, PHP, Python. They all have all sorts of libraries that extend the power, right? A lot of them are open source that you can just bring with you and extend the ability, the capabilities of the framework. Yes. So this node, right? If we look at the acronym of the technology we're looking at, the technology stack that we're considering is the mean stack, right? That's what we've been looking at last couple of weeks, right? So meaning, for the last couple of weeks, we've been focusing on the A for Angular, right? Right, which is it's referred to as MVC. It's a JavaScript MVC framework, right? It basically forces you to think about your web application in terms of a particular design pattern, right? Again, we talked about last week. We don't really need the MVC and this framework. We can do everything in jQuery. Right? We can do everything in JavaScript, right? We don't need any of this. But again, as we work on project after project after project, we start looking at patterns, right? We seem to be solving things. We seem to have identified certain design patterns that seem to work fairly well, right, for similar problems. So MVC is one of them, and AngularJS is just forces you to think of your web development in that using the MVC design pattern. Right, so it starts naming things. Here's a controller, here are modules, here's a server, here's a factory, injection, inversion of control. All those are things that, right? Those are all design patterns that we've copied from server-side technologies. Right, they have worked very well in server-side technology. We're copying them over and bringing them over to the client. Right. So today I'd like to focus on two of these acronyms. N for Node, and Node. Again, the only thing it is just a JavaScript interpreter for the desktop, right? And that's not very exciting. What makes Node exciting is one particular library, right? One particular library that we can include or import, right? Or make available through the Node framework called Express or Express.js. This Express.js is it's one of the more popular NodeJS libraries that allows you to create simple servers, very simple servers, very lightweight servers. If you thought maybe Tomcat was lightweight, NodeJS is several orders of magnitude even lighter. Right? It's just a couple lines of code and boom, you get a server running. Okay, so for prototyping and getting something up and running real quick and trying out very quick. Well, not only small things. I mean, this could very easily grow and expand and scale up very quickly. So I like to look at Express. Express.js, again, it's a library for very quickly creating a server. In just 3 lines of code, you get a server running. Okay? Another line of code, and you've got a server hosting all sorts of HTML and static pages. Right? Maybe another couple of lines, and you got web services running. Right? So it's a very, very easy, a nice library for doing all sorts of server-side proxies. These proxies that access server-side resources, Express makes it very, very easy to code. Okay, so let's let me introduce you to Express. I just created a directory where I'm going to put all the things I need to work with Node.js. Right? You can call it whatever you want. No, this is a generic folder, right? Any folder, and I'm going to do all my work under that folder. Anywhere, doesn't matter. Yep, anywhere. Okay. All right, so in here, the only thing I have is hello.js, right? That's all I have. What I'm going to do is I'm going to install the Express library, right? It is not a native library, right? Node.js comes with lots of libraries. Express is not one of them, okay? So to install it, we're going to use the Node Package Manager to install Express, right? To install it, to look at, I mean, you can look up all the libraries that are available if you go to npm npmjs.org, right? And here it's a list of all the various packages that are available. Express, notice, is one of the the more popular ones are way at the top, right? And Bower and Grunt, they're also very, very Gulp. They're becoming more and more popular. And you can search here. For instance, I like to search and Express. And here's a match. That's the first one. That's the latest version. Is 4.12. And they tell you how to install it. You just say npm install Express. Okay, so let's copy that and paste it here. npm install Express. Notice that I only have hello.js. What this is going to do is it's going to download the library and going to copy the necessary libraries here. This is equivalent in Maven or in Java to downloading a jar file, right, and including it in your class path. Yes, or downloading, you know, a DLL in .NET, right, and including it in your path. Right? So this is going to go out, right, to npm. And it's going to download, and it's going to copy it locally. There it is. So it went out and downloaded the necessary libraries. If we do it at last, now we have an additional directory here. You see that? And it says, these are the modules I have downloaded so far. If you go in there and you do an ls node modules, only Express has been downloaded and installed locally. We can install any, you know, a slew of other libraries here. Are we okay? You're still with me? Okay. What else? Okay, and they have a very quick example on how to a 3-line of code to get a server up and running. Okay, let's copy that their example. Let's copy that, right? And I'm gonna go into my folder. I'm gonna create an additional JavaScript where I'm gonna paste this. So this is going to be my server app. Right, this is what's going to be running on my server. Right, so I'm going to call it my server app. Okay, and I'm going to paste what I just copied. And let's look at this a little bit, right? So here, require, right? It's Node.js's equivalent to import or include, right? There's this library out there. I would like to include it in my namespace, right? This current namespace. And then I like to create an instance of that, right? Once I have an instance, I have a whole bunch of methods that are available to me. Right? One of them, once I have an instance of Express, right? One of the things that I could do is ask Express. Again, Express allows me to do all sorts of things, server-side things, right? Like listen for a particular URL pattern. Listen in, right? Listen for incoming types of URLs, right? This one says, if someone comes in to this domain, right, and doesn't ask for anything in particular, / meaning this is the root, right? If nobody asks for anything in particular, just say hello. Right? Send text back saying hello. Okay. Or I can create more. I can create other URL patterns. You can say goodbye or bye. So this would say, we'd come back and say goodbye. Okay. It's then up with semicolons. I'm sorry. All right, so these are. I'm telling the server. Listen in for just the root context, right? Or listen in for a URL that ends in by. Okay. And in either case, respond with text, right? Or I could say respond for a file, or I can tell it go to the database, query something, and respond with something. I could do that, right? Or go out to IMDb and do some query and return something. Right now, I'm just returning text. Everybody okay? All right. So this way, the way it works is that the server is going to listen in for that pattern. If it matches, it will call your function, the function that you give it. Right now, it's an anonymous function, right? It's a inline function, right? And your function will be called if the pattern matches. It will be called with 2 arguments. One of the objects, this is very common, right? In JSPs is the same thing, right? .NET is the same thing, right? Whenever the framework calls you, it typically passes you with representations two representations, two objects, one representing the request that is coming from the client, and then an object that represents the response that you can generate back to the client, right? So you can talk, you can enter in a conversation with the client. So the request, we're not using the request for anything, right? But we could use the request to look at the URL, any query parameters, right? We can look at the path. We can parse. We can look at the originating domain, where it's coming from, the IP address from the request that is coming through, any cookies that might be provided by the client, anything that might come from the client, headers, yes, anything that comes from the client, and the response. I can generate my own response. I can generate headers back. I can set new cookies, right? I can generate a text response. So let's run this. And after I set my URLs that I'm going to listen in, I'm going to block and wait for incoming requests at port 3000. Okay, port 3000 is a very popular port for developers. Okay, okay, so I'm going to save that. So at the command line, I have server app.js. Yes, I'm not going to use hello.js anymore. So I'm going to node and execute server app.js. So I'm going to do server app.js. Notice that it blocks. See that? It blocks. The server is running. It's waiting, right, forever for incoming queries from a client. So let's do that. Let's go here and generate. Right. Right now it's localhost. Right. We are at our local machine, and it's listening in at port 3000 / That's what it's listening in, right? If I type anything else, it's going to say, I don't know. That's the server responding. The server is saying, that URL, I don't have anything that matches that URL. Okay. If I give it the /, right, that matches that one that says hello world, right? So we're going to hit that, and indeed it responds with hello world, right? If we send a bye, right, it responds with goodbye. Okay, right. So we can match a URL with a server side logic, right? We can match incoming URLs to back-end logic that can execute on the server, right? But this is not very exciting. This is not very exciting. Let's blow that away. Okay, let's do something more exciting. For that, let's go to the website that documents Express. So let's go to Express. There we go. So we are at the Express website. It's expressjs.com. Okay. And some of the more exciting things we can find in the API references. The latest version is 4x, so let's go there. In there, it gives you more or less the same example that they gave us earlier, right? That's the example that we used earlier, right? We could have copied it from here. Okay. But one of the things that we would like to be able to do is host static content like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We would like to host files, right? But we don't want to have to map every single file, right? URLs. We would like to have a generic mechanism by which, if you give me the name of a file, I will just send it back to you, right? Instead of having to map every single resource. That's just lame. So to do that, we can configure that. We could say, I want to configure a public directory, right? That anything I put in there, I will try and match that URL with documents in this public directory. Yes, that's very common, right? All servers support this. To turn on that feature, we're just going to copy this configuration. We're just going to paste it here. And what this says is that I'm telling Express that my static content lives in my current directory appended with public. The current directory with the servers running appended with public, meaning in some public directory under the current directory. Yes? So let's do that. Let's create a public directory. Let's create a public directory. And under there, I will create, let's create a file under there, or an HTML saying hello.html, right? And under here, we'll do h1. Hello from static hello.html. Okay, right. We modified the server, so we need to restart the server, which I already stopped it. Let's restart it. So now if I try to hit my server, so slash no longer matches anything. Slash doesn't match anything. The default thing to do for a server, if it doesn't match in a slash, is to look for some default file. Typically, it would be index.html, but we don't have index.html, so it didn't find it. So it responded saying, nothing matches, right? But I do have a hello under there, hello HTML. There it is, hello from static hello.html, right? So now we have basically the same setup that we were using IIS for, right? Where we can host just static content, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So we're basically where we were, last week with IIS. Okay, right? Let's extend this a little further. So I could start hosting things such as, in the public, right? I could start hosting things such as an index page, right? Index.html. I might also host under here a couple of directories, for hosting the CSS, the JavaScript files, right? The fonts, hosting all that here. Actually, let's copy all that here. Let's copy that. So explore. Let's go to downloads. And under here, I believe I have Bootstrap. So let's go to Bootstrap. And under there, I'm just going to copy these three. I'm just going to paste that in there. And I believe I have here Angular. Yeah, I do have Angular. So let's copy Angular and route. We're going to copy that and put them under JS. What else do we need? We might need jQuery. So let's jQuery. Do I have jQuery? jQuery. Okay. Let's see. What do I have here? I have jQuery. There it is. I'm just going to copy that. And here's jQuery.js. I'll copy that in here. All right. So I have everything I need. So my index page, I can load all that stuff here, right? I can load everything. I can say like we normally do, right? We say link, href. Oh, I need to update this so it sees it. Very good. So I say CSS, Bootstrap, right? So everything we were able to do in IIS, now we can do here. So style sheet. We'll load jQuery only because Bootstrap uses jQuery. jQuery. And what else do we need? We'll load Bootstrap here. Bootstrap. Okay. What else do we need? We need Angular. So Angular, there it is. And we have Angular route. There we go. So we got everything loaded. Okay. And if we say here, and we have here ng app, we'll call this developer app. Okay. So presumably there is a client app, right? As opposed to my server app.js, right? There's a server app.js that is running on the server, right? And there's going to be a client app.js that is running on the client. And these guys need to talk to one another, right? Yes? It used to be that our client, our app.js used to talk to IMDb. But instead of going out to IMDb servers, we're going to go to our own server, okay? All right? So anyway, so let's create this. So here we need to create client app.js. So let's create that. And this is client app.js. And in here, we're going to do what? We're going to do var app is angular.module. What do we call it? Developer app. Is that what I called it? And right now, we're not going to depend on anything. And I'm going to make I'm going to go here. And in the body, I'm just going to create a little div class container to make it look pretty. And I'm going to put a controller here. Right? Typically, we would use routing, right, like we did last week. But I'm not going to go into that today. We'll make it as simple as possible, just to get us going. So the controller, I'm going to create here the developer controller. Okay, and I'm just going to say hello. So just to make sure that I have a controller here that can say hello, we're going to say app controller, and it's called the developer controller, and it's a function that takes as argument the scope, and we want with the scope, we want to say hello to the client, and we're going to say scope hello from developer controller. Yes? Let's try that again. I don't believe we need to restart the server because we didn't do any changes in the server, right? We did it on the client. So the server is just there, right, waiting to serve files, right? So let's see. If we ask for index, hello from developer controller. So it's working, right? It's working. Although the font looks kind of funny, right? It looks like Bootstrap somehow it failed. What happened here? Did it not find Bootstrap? Sources, CSS, Bootstrap theme CSS. What happened to Bootstrap CSS? CSS, Bootstrap. Did I misspell it? Oh, theme. Okay. Let's try that again. Reload. There it is. Okay. It worked. Everybody okay? So we're basically back where we were last week, right? But instead of using IIS, we're using NodeJS and Express. Okay? And I mean, basically everything you could do with NodeJS, you could do with IIS, right? And everything you could do with IIS, you could do with NodeJS. Well, more or less. And some of you might say, well, then why are we even using NodeJS? And you know, one of the beauties of this is that I mean, just look at how simple it is to just create a server, right? Just with 3 lines of code, we've got a server running. But wait a minute, in IIS, we didn't even need a line of code, right? The server was already there. But wait a minute, no, we could do a couple more things here. One of the really cool things that you could do, right, is that, for instance, right, yeah, you could listen in and ask for data. Now you can ask for data. You can say, let's hard code the data for now, right? Because we don't have a server. So let's hard code the data. Say you have Alice here, right? And Alice is an object that has username Alice, or say, yeah, username Alice and password Wonderland. Okay, I can map not only to text, but I can map it to data. I can return function. And this is where it gets exciting, right? Request, response. I can send back JSON, right? I can say response, respond with plain JSON, Alice. Okay. Now, to do the same thing in Java, you would need to download all sorts of libraries, right? You would need to map URLs and say that you're mapping to you would need a converter. You need to be able to convert between Java objects, right, and convert them into JSON representations. And there's a library for that. There's several types of annotations that you would need to say, right? That it produces JSON, it consumes JSON. It's just it's quite a bit more involved, right? In other frameworks, right? The other exciting thing is this is a string. This is a string, right? You can dynamically create these strings, right? So in Java, usually you would have to have this at compile time, right? You compile and you have the URLs set in stone, right? If you want to create a generic API that can listen to all sorts of things, right? Where these are parameters, it would be a little more involved, right? We could look at that a little later, but we'll see. Let's restart the server. Let's restart the server. And now I can ask for objects, right? I can say, I want Alice, right? And it responds with JSON, right? It says, I have data for that, right? It's already converted. The great thing is that there is no conversion. Right? You have JavaScript all throughout the framework, right? There is no conversion between, you know, a JSON representation in JavaScript in the browser and JSON representation running on the server, right? And next week, when we start looking at MongoDB, there will be no conversion, right, between the server and the database, because we will natively store JSON in the database as well, right? This usually comes at a complication when you look at other frameworks, right? Again, with Entity Framework in .NET or JPA in Java, right? Where you're trying to map two different worlds. You're trying to map the object world representation of an object-oriented language, right, into a relational model, right? And that not necessarily it's a one-to-one, right? Because there's certain things that you can do in the object world that you can't do in the relational world, right? And vice versa, right? So the mapping of these two worlds often, right, it's not perfect, or you have to guide that conversion, right? We will eliminate that necessity, right, of using ORMs, although we will use an ORM to just help us, right, to help do this mapping, and we'll see that, you know, JavaScript is taking over the world over here. Anyway, so we have Alice here. Say I have you know, a set of users. So I say var developers, right, as an array of objects. So I might have that one that has first name Alice and last name Wonderland, right? And maybe several others. So let's have here Alice, Bob, Charlie, Dan, and Ed. So this is Bob Marley. This is Charlie Garcia, as opposed to Jerry Garcia. Dan Aykroyd, I think this is how you spell it, and Edward Norton. Okay, so I have these objects. So I could map, right? I could map and say I want developers. So if you ask me for developers, I will return the developers as an array, right? So let me restart the server. Right, I can now ask for all the developers. Okay, there they are. It's an array of developers, right? Or I can ask for a particular developer by mapping this, right? It's creating another one that says, actually, I don't like using plurals. I do not like using plurals, right? So sorry about that. And this would be developer / and then maybe an index, right? That I want developer 1, 2, or 3. Which developer do you want, right? So I can provide maybe an index here, right? And this would be what we need to parse this. I notice that has a colon. That colon means that this is a parameter, right? This is a something that is going to be provided by the client, right? And it's going to be whatever follows developer / is going to be mapped to a variable in the request as a parameter. Okay, it's going to parse it out, and it's going to make it available to you through the request object. Okay, as a map. Right, we can retrieve the index. We can retrieve the index from the request.params map. Right, we can either use this syntax index like that, right, where this matches that. This doesn't have to match that. Okay. Actually, let's make it explicit that it doesn't have to match. Okay, so this has to match that. right? You can use that syntax, or you could use the alternative syntax. You could also you could use request.params.index. That's an equivalent syntax, right? In JavaScript, you can these two syntaxes are interchangeable, okay, which is pretty cool. This is the dot notation, right? And this is like the map notation. Okay. Okay. Now that I have the index, I can use that as an index into my array, right? And just return that one developer. Okay. So let's save that. Let's restart the server. So notice that if I refresh now, it's going to fail because there is no developers anymore, right? There's no developers anymore. I changed that URL to be just the singular version. There it is, right? Now we're getting all the developers, or I want developer 0, just Alice, right? Or developer 1, Bob, right? Or developer 2, Charlie. Make sense? All right. Now typically, notice the syntax that I'm using. The syntax, right, is based on a standard, right? Well, I guess it's a standard that we use when we're using RESTful APIs, right? And the syntax is entity type, right, / ID, right? If you give me if you do a get, right, there's really 4 types of things that you could do with any resource, right? Which match very nicely with the 4 kinds of things that you could do with entity, right? What do you want to do with an entity? You want to create a new entity, right? You want to be able to read all those entities in the collection of all entities, right? You want to read a particular entity. You want to be able to delete an entity, and you want to be able to update an entity. That's all there is, right? Plus all the things that you can relate that entity with. Right? An entity can be related with other entities, yes? Right? So developer, I want to be able to create an entity, right? I want to be able to create, read one, read all, update, and delete, right? So to be able to read all, right, the standard stipulates that you just provide, you use a get. Notice what's happening behind the scenes, right? If I look at the network, right, and I do refresh, notice what's happening, right? We're generating. There it is. We're generating a URL and with a get, yes, that says that's the entity I'm trying to access, right? Followed by a particular one. So there's 2 of them there, right? One of them knows how to handle just developer. So if you don't tell me which developer, I will return the collection of all developers. Yes. If you tell me which one you want, I will only return that one. Right? We're using this as an index, but later on next week we'll use this as an ID. An ID, a primary key, right, into a row or a collection. Make sense? Right? So what about relationships? Right? So we're going to use the two gets to get one or get many. Right? What about relationship? Getting relationship, like for instance, what if there's a one-to-many of a developer having developed many applications, right? So there's a one-to-many relationship between developer and application, right? In the relational world, the way we do this is that the children, right, have a reference back to the parent, right? We have a foreign key from the child back to the parent, right? Over here in the JavaScript world, in the MongoDB world, right, you still can do that. You can still do that. But instead, what's preferable is that you just embed it. Applications, you embed it right in the data, okay, as an additional attribute. So applications here would be an array of other objects embedded here, right? So the name of the application might be Word. Another one might be Excel. And they work on Okay, it's embedded right in there. Okay, so let's restart the server. So when we ask for all the developers, notice that I get Alice. Alice has included the array of its applications. See that? Right? Right. All the other ones don't have any applications. Right. Let's add empty applications for those. Right. Let's say that none of them worked in any other application. So let's do applications empty. Applications empty. Okay. Restart the server. If I ask for one particular one, if I say developer 0, that's Alice, I'm getting Alice and I have the applications, right? So that's how it's represented in as an actual object. And there's a one-to-many, right? The developer has many applications. So to be able to access the applications, oh, I did it again. I used the plural. Okay. Sorry. Okay, application. There it is. So if I want the application for Alice, right? The standard says that you go parent, yes, parent entity / a particular record / child or children, right? So it would be / application that would have to return all the applications for Alice. Yes? And then if you want a particular application that Alice worked on, you would have to tell me now the ID for that particular application. That makes sense? All right. I'm sorry? I'm sorry? Yeah, so you're talking about many-to-many, right? Also, this current implementation doesn't allow me to access applications in their own context without any sense of what are all the applications, right? This particular implementation doesn't allow me to do that, right? Yeah, we'll get to that when we do databases and how to represent all these one-to-many, many-to-many mappings, associations, all sorts of things, right? But the preferred way, if you can get away with it, right, would be to embed as much as possible. Okay.
We need to create a mapping of parent and child as well. If you want to get that.
Again, only if you really need to. Okay. But if there's a one-to-many and those many are unique, right? Then that's it. Just embed it. Okay. If you have things such as, oh well, I worked on words too. Well, now how do you represent many-to-many, right? And because we will be using non-relational databases, then it starts to get when you try to introduce relational, try to use a non-relational database as a relational database, it starts getting hairy. And we'll consider those things next week. We'll talk about MongoDB. But again, if you can get away with it, this is the preferred way, already embedded. Even if this might entail some redundancy, okay? What you're looking for here is speed, right? Where you're trying to avoid as much as possible joins, okay? And again, you would say, well, but what about referential integrity, right? And and the risk of redundancy. But I mean, we've been solving those kinds of issues at the application level for quite a while, right? In Java, we use those issues, right? We have objects. Right, and objects have references amongst each other, right? The fact that we're mapping this to a database with relational assets, right, is just because that's the way we've been representing databases for the last couple of decades, right? But if we had to reinvent databases today, right, we would like it to be as close as possible to our programming paradigms, object-oriented paradigms, right? And if we keep everything in the object-oriented world in RAM, we would like the database only to just be some repository where we store the object into persistent storage, right? And we just like to be able to reinstantiate that back into RAM at a later time. right? What's the fastest way to map objects in our application to persistent storage? What's the fastest way? So this is one of the fastest way. Okay. All right. So again, those are database questions that we would talk about those in 5200. Where were we? So anyway, so yeah, so we would like to be able to extract the applications for Alice, or for so we would like to do things like this. We would like to do something like this, like developer index, right? / application. You know what I mean? I want all the applications for that particular user, right? So that would be, here's the developer, right, for that particular index, dot application. It returns the applications, right? And if you want a particular application, you would have another URL. It would be app index, right? So it would you would get app index. Now you have two indexes. One index is for the developer, and the other index is for the application. And all of this is hard-coded right now, right? It's hard-coded on the server. Next week, instead of being hard-coded, we'll be getting it from the database. Yes? So in here, you would be doing the query to the database to fetch data from the persistent storage. Yes? Right now, we're hard-coding it. It's just an array, okay, in our local server. Make sense? Okay. What I'm trying to point out here, the topic of today's lecture and next Fridays is being able to create these mappings, right? Use Express to create basically what are these? These are web service endpoints, right? Web service endpoints. And we're mapping these endpoints, right, to code in the back that fetches data and responds with data. Make sense? Right? Notice how quickly we can create these web services, right? In other frameworks, it's not as trivial. Okay, let's stop that and let's restart. Right, and again over here now, if I say Alice and I want the application, so I want application 0, it returns Word. See that? It returns just the Word application or Excel. Right, or PowerPoint, and this allows you, right, using this URL pattern, right, using this URL format allows you to navigate, right, starting off with a parent and navigate throughout your entire data model. Parent to its children, to its children, to its children, to its children. Okay, that makes sense, right? Okay. All right, so we know how to get data. How about put data? Push data to the server. We're going to store the data in the server. Let's do that now. Now, to do that, we can't do it from here, from the URL. We can't do it from the URL, only because our browsers, you can only generate gets. You can only generate gets in the networks. You can only do gets, right? So for instance, we're doing, all these are gets. See, get, right? You can only do gets from this input field over here. To send data to the server or to create data, the standard suggests that instead of using get, we use post to create data, right? If you want to modify data, we would use put, right? If you want to remove data, we use delete. Okay? All right, so let's do that. First, let's start with something simple. Let's delete. All right, let's delete. All right, so to do that, now I want to remove a developer. Okay, so how's that? To do that, we say, hey, app, I want you to listen for a delete. Right, all these here are saying I am listening for gets. Okay, this is the type of method that is being used to the HTTP request, right? Here, I'm going to be listening for a delete of the same URL, developer. Notice that the URL is the same. The URL is the same. You see that? Meaning, I am working with this type of entity. I am working with the developer entity, right? What can I do with a developer entity? I can get all of them. I can get one. I can delete one. I can create a brand new one, or I can modify one. Those are the only 5 operations. Yes, we've done 2. Right, get one and get all of them. We did those 2. So delete, and what are we going to do? Function. We get request, response, and what we're going to do is our data. We have the array. We need the index. I'm sorry. If we're going to delete one, right? Delete like that would mean what? Delete all of them, right? Maybe we don't want to do that, right? We will ignore references to delete all the the developers, right? Instead, I want you to give me an ID or an index, right? For which developer you want to remove. We'll get the index from the request params, that ID, and I'm going to use that to splice my array at index 1. So I'm going to splice that out, and I'm going to respond. I'm going to respond with the remaining developers. Okay, so this will have all the developers minus that one developer. Okay, all right. So let's restart the server. Let's restart the server. But there's no way for me to generate that delete. I can't generate the deletes. The only way that I'm going to be able to generate that delete is programmatically. Okay. So from Angular or from jQuery, okay, or using one of the Chrome's plugins, right, that allows you to send data like that. So let's go back to our client. Let's go back to our client application, and let's see if we can, from our controller, let's see if we can hit those URLs, right? Let's hit those URLs. Let's see if we can hit them. We're using HTTP GET. Yep. Typically, you would not be doing this from a controller. Typically, you would be doing this from a service. Okay, like we did last week. I believe we used a service. Remember, we used a service so we could use it across several controllers. So anyway, but I'm lazy today, so we're going to do it right from the controller. Right, we're going to say I want to generate a GET. Here, I'm generating a GET. Remember what we did last week? We were using JSON-P. Remember that? Why were we using JSON-P? Because the URL lived in a different domain than ours. Remember that? Right? Over here, we don't have that problem, right? Because this JavaScript is being downloaded from the same domain where the service lives, right? So this JavaScript is talking to the same domain. So here, there is no need for doing JSON-P. There's no need for the hack, right? We can just generate a regular GET, okay? So we're just going to do $http.get, go to the URL. The URL is developer. This retrieves what? All the developers. Yes? Right? And what do we do? If it's successful, well, and what do we do with the response? We want to render it, right? So let's send it to the client, right? Let's send it to the UI to be rendered, right? So I'm going to say scope dot developers equal response. Okay? Yes? All right. In the client, what can I do in the client? Let's see. I don't want hello anymore. Let's render the developers. All right, let's try that. Let's hit our index page. Oops. That's our index page. There it is, right? What is it doing? It's rendering the response, right? Right on our page, our index page. Yes? What should we do? We should iterate over this, right? We should iterate. So let's do that real quick. What we can do here is create a table. Class tables striped key body tr, and tr is going to be our repeat, ng repeat developer in developers, and it's going to have a td where it's going to render the developer first name, one of them, and developer's last name in the other one, right? That's what's in the object, right? Notice it's an array, which I'm going to iterate over. And each object that I'm iterating over has an attribute first name and an attribute last name. First name, last name, first name, last name. I'm just iterating over each one, and I'm just going to print out, right? Oops. I'm going to refresh. There it is, right? So we have a table, okay? We have a table. So what I want to be able to do is, so that works, right? So that works, right? Being able to retrieve one. I'm not doing anything with hello. I'm just going to remove that. What I want to be able to do is now generate a button that would allow me to remove that one developer. Yes? So let's do that. Let's create another TD here and put a button here. Button class, button danger, so it's red. And here we're going to put a span with a class of an X. Yes? So let's fetch that X from Bootstrap. So components, the X is right here, right there. Remove. I'm going to paste it in here. Let's re-render our page. There's the X, right? We're going to push it to the right-hand side. Right? Let's push it to the right-hand side. So we'll do pull right. The render is to the right-hand side. Everybody okay? Right? And if I click on it, ng click, I want to notify the controller that I want to remove this particular developer. Yes, I'm going to say delete or remove. Okay, and I'm going to pass as an argument the index, right, of what I'm removing. Index. So that means that the controller, I'm going to put an event handler for that remove. Yes, so I'm going to say $, scope. Remove. It's a function that accepts the index of what I'm removing, and I need to notify the server that I am deleting. Yes, so I'm going to say $HTTP dot delete. So just like I generated earlier a get to that URL, I'm going to generate a delete to a URL, right? And the server is waiting for it, right? There it is. That's waiting for that. It's waiting for a URL that is developer / and then some index of what you want to remove, right? So let's go back and say, okay, I'm going to generate a delete. The URL is delete. Is it delete? Oh no, sorry, developer. The resource I'm working with, right? I'm working with the developer resource, and I'm going to provide the index as an argument. And if it's successful, what's it going to respond with? The remaining developers, right? The remaining developers. So it's going to say function response. That's the remaining developers. I'm going to just send it back to the UI. You know, developers equal response. Okay, that should be the developers that are left over. So let's try that. So let's refresh. So let's remove Charlie Garcia. There, it's gone. See that? If we inspect and we look at the network and clear it, notice what's happening, right? If I click on Dan Aykroyd, look at that down here, right? If I click on Dan Aykroyd, there it is. See that? What is it doing? It's generating a delete. See that? It's sending, if you look at the address, right, it's going to localhost developer /2, the index. So this URL matches the URL that the server is waiting for, right? Yeah, the server is waiting for delete of that URL, right? And it is that the request method is delete. Yeah? And what it responds with the remaining 3 developers. There's only 3 developers left. Okay. And if I refresh to get all these 3, it's still 3. So it's persistent. It's persistence in the server's memory, right? As long as the server is running, it will remember that this array only has 3 elements left. Okay, but if I restart the server, right? If I restart the server, right, it goes back to where we were. So we never persisted it to a database, right? Right. So if I refresh, I have all of them back, right? Because again, the array contains five developers. Everybody still with me? Everybody okay? All right. All right. So now we can read all. We can read one. Okay. We can delete. Right. How about creating? How about creating? All right. For creation, the standard says that you should use the post. You use a post. So let's generate a post from the front end, right? To generate a post, we're gonna need a form, right? For somebody to type in the names of our new developer. Excuse me. We're gonna havethead. So in thead, we're going to create a little form for a couple input fields here. So input class form control, and I'm going to tie this to an ng model. And I'm going to say this is developer, okay? Developer dot first name, okay? And I'm going to do another one for developer last name, okay? And I'm going to put a button at the end. I'm going to copy from here a button. Put a button here at the end. Using th. But it's going to call add. Okay, it's going to call some other method, and it's going to pass as an argument the developer. Okay, and instead of being red, instead of being danger, I'm going to use success, which makes it green. Yes, and instead of an X, I want a plus sign, and plus. I think it's just plus. Is it? I think. Right. So if I refresh, I got the form at the top. Okay. Or maybe a placeholder to tell me that one is first and the other one's last. Right? So anyway, so that we have the form, but we still haven't. It doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't do anything. We need an event handler that handles the add, right? So let's go to our controller and let's add scope add function the developer that we're adding, and we can do console.log just to see what the developer we're about to create. So if we inspect and we look at the console, right? If I type something and I do plus, notice that it creates the object. Yes. So I have the object. Right? I need to send that object to the server and say, hey, this is a brand new record, right? All right. So the way to do that is very much like this, right? Just very much like the get, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to copy that. But instead of get, I want a post. I want to send a post. I'm going to say post, okay? And not only do I need to tell what the URL, but I need to pass data too, right? Which is a developer. And the developer is in the format of JSON, okay? And the server would know how to receive the JSON and parse it and convert it. That's the JSON. That's the server's job, right? Convert this string representation of a JSON object into an actual object, right? So let's see what happens. So let's refresh and let's create something. If I click on it, it's going to complain. It says the server doesn't know any post. Right? It's not waiting for any post. Okay. So if you go there, it's not found. There is no URL developer that is expecting request method post. There is no such thing, right? So the server needs to change too. Let's go on the server. Let's stop it. Let's go on the server and create our post handler app post. It's listening for a post, listening for developer, and response. Okay, right? So in here, what are we going to do? We have to take that object that is being passed to us, and we're going to push it to our developers array, right? So let's see what that would look like. Say we have the object, right? Var object. Say we have the object, and it looks something like first name first, comma, last name last. States that, right? We would do what? We would say developers push that object and then respond with all the developers, including now that developers contains this brand new object in there, right? Let's see if that works. Let's go here. Let's refresh. Okay. Let's create. Let's clean this. We add. Notice that the post is no longer complaining. See that? The post is no longer complaining. And the new object was added to the array. Right? Actually, what I'm sending is being ignored, right? The object I'm sending is being ignored, right? The server is creating its own object and it's pushing its own object to the array. So I can keep adding, right? And the server is just adding all lots of first, last, right? It's adding its own thing. What we need to do is use the object that we're sending, okay? To do that, we need to do a couple things in the server. As it stands, the server doesn't know how to parse the object that's being passed to it. Okay, it doesn't know how to parse it. It used to, right, in older versions of NodeJS, but NodeJS, as every framework, has been growing and growing and growing, right? And they've been splitting it up into smaller modules. Yes. So now the part of the server that knows how to parse objects coming from a HTTP request lives in a separate module, okay, which we need to install. All right, so let's do that. If you go to the documentation to Node.js, the Express framework, if you look for body parser, there it is, body parser. If you want to be able to parse JSON from the body, because what happens is that the object is not passing the URL, it's being passed as the body of the HTTP request, right? Okay. To be able to parse that out and convert it back into a JSON object, we need to install body parser. Okay. Also, if we want to be able to handle form data, right, that's encoded using form data, right, we need to include this other library as well, right? Both of them used to be part of Express, but again, Express has been growing, right? It's been now split, just like Angular, right? Angular is now split into the core, and then it has the routing. The routing is not part of just like jQuery, right? jQuery UI doesn't form part of jQuery. Same thing here, right? You break it apart. So anyway, we're gonna need to install these two libraries, Multer and Body Parser. Okay? And then include these 3 lines of code in our server. All right, so we'll do this and include it right here. Okay. I'm sorry? Oh, parameters? You mean query parameters? What do you mean parameters? Session? Yes. Yeah, you can handle sessions as well here. Like session? Yes, there are. And I will. Okay. So these applications can be either stateful or stateless. Okay. And in general, right, stateless applications are easier to grow, right? To respond to more load, right? As you have more servers, because as you have more clients that are hitting your server, right? Because session entails asking the server to remember something about you. Okay, So stateful applications, where you're trying to remember something about the server, are less easy to grow, right? In response, and because you're asking the server to remember things, so you need more RAM, you need more everything, right? So we're going to focus a lot on stateless applications as much as possible, right? We'll use stateful only to remember perhaps a session where you have logged in, right? And you have identified yourself. I know who you are, right? I can now, keep track of a cookie for you, and so I can remember who you are, right? But for the most part, we will try to be as stateless as possible. Okay. Again, stateful applications can be harder to grow, and the state of our application will be mostly driven by the URL. Okay, in the URL, we will be able to recuperate, right, the state of the application only based on the application, on the URL. Okay, as opposed to having to remember things and whatnot. So, for instance, I could email your URL, right, and then you can click on that URL. Well, after you log in and whatnot and identify yourself, it would load the application exactly how I'm looking at it, right? So the URL. So just if you go to Amazon, right, and you're looking at a page, all those pages are dynamically rendered, right? I mean, there is no physical page, right? None of those pages are physical, right? So all those pages are dynamic, right? So I would like to replicate that page, even though it physically doesn't exist, right, from the URL, correct? I haven't logged in, I found something, I have a product, I want to send you that URL. Now you click on that URL, you're looking at the same page I'm looking at, right? So we would like to be able to replicate that kind of behavior where we can reconstitute the state of the application just from the URL, okay? Again, there's additional things that we need to do if you're looking at profile information or sensitive information where you have to log in, right? And you have to identify yourself, and I need to track you now if you're logged in or not, and what things could you touch or not, right? But that's another issue. But yes, we have session, or the equivalent of session. Okay. Where are we? Body parser, thank you. Yeah, so we included body parser so that we can extract that JSON object. So let's we need to, just like we installed Express, we need to install body parser. Let's do that. How do we install? We did npm install body parser, right? It will download the libraries and it will put it in the node modules directory, right? If we do ls node modules, now we have Express and we have body parser, and we need the other one, Multer. Right, we'd say npm install Multer. Right, and now we have all three, right? Express, body parser, and Multer. Okay, so now our code makes sense. What is it doing? It's importing, right? Importing body parser, yes, just like we imported Express. Now we're importing the library body parser. We're importing the Multer body parser. Now we have it as objects local to our code. We instantiate a couple of things, saying I want to be able to handle URL encoded data. I want to handle JSON. I want to be able to parse JSON, and also want to be able to handle multi-part form data. Although we're not going to be using that today, but later on we will. Right? Anyway, these are the 3 lines of code that we need. Now that we have that, right, our post can now receive that JSON object in the body. Okay, so where is this object? This object is now in the request, in the body of the request. And now body, right, is an object in the request that contains whatever it parses, whatever JSON parses from the request, right? And we're going to push it into the developers. Make sense? All right, let's try it again. Start the server again. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay, let's refresh this. And we have Alice, so let's add Ed, A, B, C, D, E, F, right? So Frank Herbert at Frank Herbert. There it is. So it works, right? Frank. Greg. Greg who? Peck. Right, so it's working, right? So it's grabbing the body, right, and adding it to the array, right? And I can remove, add. So we have remove, add. I can, you know, any one of them. Or I can add another one. Yes. Okay. So we did 4 of the 5 operations, right? We can get all of them. We can get one. We can create one. We can delete one. The last one is I want to be able to modify an existing one, right? So let's do that. Work on that. So on the client, I would like to be able to select, right? So from the UI, perhaps what we want to do is have a button, right? Have a button that allows me to select. So let's add a button here that says select, right? Select. And instead of danger, it'll be maybe a warning. Warning. So I think that's yellow or orange. And instead of remove, I'll use a pencil. Pencil for I want to edit this. I want to edit. So select is going to select the item, and what's going to do? Let's go in the here, and let's create the event handler. Is going to grab and say select function. It's going to say index. Has the index. What do we want to do? I think what we want to do is grab the developer. Actually, why don't we pass the developer, the actual developer? Do we need the index? Do we need the index? Let's pass the index. I want to, wait, where am I putting this? Oh yeah, okay. What I want to do is I want to copy that particular developer in that index. I want to copy it into my form. See that? We'll copy it into my form so that now you can edit it. Okay, so let's do that. So what I want to do is I want to say scope developer. That's the form, right? That's the form. I want to set it equal to what's in the array scope dot developer sub index. Okay. And so what I'm doing is that I am copying the. Well, it's actually not copying, right? This is not copied by value. It's copied by reference, right? So if I will go here, right, and I select, there's my pencil. Notice that it's copying, right, there, but it's by reference, right? It's not by value, meaning that whatever I do here happens to the original object, right? Which is pretty cool. But this is being edited only on the client. The server doesn't know anything about this, right? I'm modifying the model in the client, but it's not being synchronized with the server, right? So I want to do that when you hit done or save or something, right? So to do that, I'm going to add an additional button here. I'm going to add an additional button. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to copy it here. And this is going to be not select, it's going to be update or save, right? So update. And what is it going to update? Update is going to give the developer, right? So this is the new developer. This is the new value for the developer. I'm going to use the color, not warning. I'm going to use primary for blue. And I'm going to use the OK. I think that's a check mark. Okay. So I render it. That's a check mark. There it is. So, and then I need the event handler, right, for this on the client. The client, I'm going to do scope scope update function, the developer, right? The new data for the developer. Let's just say console.log developer. So if I look at my console, right, and I select one, and I say okay, there it is, right? The new data is there. What I do not have is the index, right? I need to tell the server, hey, in your array, it's the first element in that array that I'm updating, or the third or the fourth. Right? I don't have that. So somewhere, when I clicked on the select button, when I clicked on the select button here, I had the index here, but it kind of got lost, right? I lost it. So I'm going to store it in scope in a variable index. I'll call it selected index. Right now is null. But when you do select, I'm going to remember that it's equal to that index. And what I'm going to do is that now I have both. In the update, both I have the new object and I have the index, right? So I'm going to send an HTTP. Again, get is for reading, post is for creating, delete is for deleting, and put is for updating, right? So HTTP put, I'm sending a put request to developer. Okay, this is an existing developer, so I need to tell you which one, and it's by the index, so it's in scope.selectedIndex, right? And I'm passing you the new data, developer. Developer. And if it's successful, hopefully it will send me in the response again a list of all these guys, right? So scope.developers equals response. Okay, so let's see. Let's try that again. Let's try that. So if we select one, select Charlie Garcia, I change it and I send it, notice that it's complaining. Why is it complaining? Because the server doesn't have a listener for a put. Right? Just like in the post, it wasn't listening for post before. It doesn't have a listener for the put. Right? What am I sending? Let's see. I'm sending one for developer one, and I'm also sending, notice that I'm sending the data, right? Right. So let's see. So in the server, I need to listen for that put. It's very similar to my delete. So I copied and pasted it. So I'm going to change this to a put. I'm listening for incoming put with that URL pattern. I got the index, and I need the new object, right? I did that in my post. So let's copy from there. There it is, right? var object body, and I'm going to push that. So in the put, where's the put? There it is. And put. Oh, no splice, right? That's from my copy before in my delete, right? So I got the index. I got the body. Actually, I don't need to put it in a separate object and just put this here, right? Oh, wait, it's not push. It's not push. It's what? It's developers sub index, right? Is equal to the request body, right? I am replacing whatever I had with this new data, right? Okay. Again, you could be more granular, right? And maybe you can edit just the last name, only the first name, right? Instead of just blindly replacing the entire record, you could be more granular, right? And we'll do that next week when we start looking at databases, right? And looking very, going as granular to different sections, right? So let's try that again. We got the index, and actually we don't need this, right? We can just copy this. Oops, we can have this in here. We don't need that either, right? So let's restart the server. Okay, and now notice that before. Okay, let's reload. Let's reload. So say I want to change Bob, and let's see the response. Let's look at the inspect. So I have Bob. I'm going to change that to Robert. Okay, and I say update. Let's look at the consoles if anything goes wrong. Update. Okay, network. All right, looks like it worked, right? It's not red. Let's see if the change happened. I'm going to refresh the entire page. Yeah, it did change, right? So Robert, now we have Robert and Marley, right? So that works, right? So again, we were able to do all 4 or 5 CRUD operations, right? Create, read, read all, update, and delete, okay? What's left is being able to handle nested or relationships, right? When you have a developer having many applications, and we'll do that next week. But just to talk about what you were mentioning about one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, typically, this is where we want to be as much as possible, right? Because we want to avoid joins, right? So some people would consider this to be a denormalized model, right? But it's not very denormalized because there's a hierarchical relationship here, right? You know, just like if you would be using XML, you would do the same thing, right? You would have things nested within each other, right? And things that have parent-child relationship, the children would be embedded in their parents, right? So same thing here. The children are embedded in as arrays of others, right? To represent this, but again, sometimes you want to be able to handle the applications on their own, right? So you might have a separate array or collection, as we'll start referring to them next week, where you have applications or application, right? Where you have an array of applications, and these, right? These live under here. Okay, and they would have their index and they have their ID and whatnot. Okay, and over here instead, there's 2 ways of doing this. One way is to have a mapping. This is the classical, right? The classical is that you would have a mapping where you have dev to applications, right? Saying that the developer 1 is related to app 2, right? And this is like foreign keys, right? You say this developer is related to that application, right? And that's a many-to-many, right? Where you have plus more any association that you might have, right? Any other associations that you might want to have. So that's one way. The other way is to instead, right, have the developer keep track of the IDs and say, I worked on application 1 and 3, okay, whereas Bob worked on applications 2 and 4, okay, where these are the IDs are foreign keys, right, foreign keys to the actual application, right, and obviously you would have to join these things, right, where you would have to retrieve these things. Or many-to-many, where an application might know who the developers are, developers, right? Where you have an array that you say, you know, these developers worked on this applications, right? So you can go both ways, right? Where an application knows about the developer, so it has a list of developers, very typical in JPA applications, right? Where you have a many-to-many, and you don't want a mapping table. You know, typically you have 2 objects, each one with lists of the other. Right, so where you have the developer has a list of applications, and an application has a list of the developers, right? And each one knows about each other, and typically you either resolve that as with an intermediate mapping table, you know, because you know in SQL in relational model you have to reify it, right? You have to have an intermediate table, but in the object model it's perfectly fine. You don't need an intermediate, right? Each one could have a list of the other, right, could have references. These are all RAM, right? These are all RAM references, right? They come and go. They're volatile, right? But when you're going to persist it, right, that's when it comes in. How do you want to persist it, right? If you're using if you're using a SQL, a relational model, you have to have a reified mapping table in the middle, or you can only have them one-to-many on each side, right? Where you have one developer knows about many applications, or an application knows about many developers having foreign keys pointing to each other, right? But here you have different options. You have an intermediate mapping table, which is the closest to the classical implementation, right? Or right, each one has references like this, okay? And we will consider each implementation. Or what everybody prefers, right? The preference is to have the objects embedded right there. Okay, so you avoid the joining altogether. All right. All right, we'll leave that and those discussions for next week when we talk about the databases. Today we just have Node.js. All right. Uh-oh. I have to go back to where I was. That was working. Was this one it? All right. Okay, thank you. Yes. Oh no.